Ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you to delve into the sobering truth encapsulated in the words of many. Hurt people hurt people. These words unravel a cycle of pain passed down through generations, a cycle that continues to reverberate through history and echo in the lives of countless individuals today. From ancient civilizations to the industrial age and beyond, the legacy of abuse persists, leaving scars that transcend time. So what does abuse mean? According to the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, also known as CAPTA, abuse can be defined as any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caregiver that results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, and exploitation. As many know, there are subcategories that fall under the term abuse. There are three major types of abuse: physical, cognitive, and sexual. According to the Washington State Department of Social and Health Service, the three types of abuse are defined as follows. Physical abuse is intentional bodily injury. Cognitive abuse is purposely causing mental or emotional pain. And sexual abuse is non-consensual sexual contact. All of these variations of abuse have a long-lasting effect on an individual. There is no dispute that abuse is profoundly detrimental and results in lasting damage. Yet some may argue that nothing can be done to remedy such a situation. They may argue that it is incurable and no solution could fix the damage done to an individual by abuse. However, we should try to assist these victims. Survivors of childhood abuse are not receiving adequate support for these three reasons: the long-term and short-term effects of abuse, ineffectiveness of current support, and the steps we need to take. The trauma that an individual experiences during childhood can facilitate negative effects on their development into adulthood. Adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, are potentially traumatic events that a child ages 0 to 17 encounters, which results in negative developmental impacts throughout adulthood. As described by the CDC, ACEs can include direct or indirect events which may have an impact on a child, such as experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, having a family member attempt or die by suicide, or even environmental factors such as economic downturn. According to the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center, data collected through their 1995 study helped researchers prove that ACEs experienced by the participants had a direct impact on their well-being in adulthood. The residual effects on an adverse childhood experience on adulthood is further reinforced by Erik Erikson's theory regarding the stages of psychosocial development, which stresses the importance of skill mastery and advancement. Erikson's theory was based on what is known as an epigenetic principle, which suggests that people grow in a sequence that occurs over time and in the context of a larger community. An individual's personality develops in a unique sequence of necessary steps, directly affected by social interactions, relationships, and events. This means that if our healthy experiences directly contribute to our positive development, then our traumatic experiences could lead to a hindrance of our development as well. Adverse childhood experiences are a prevalent issue that impact a significant portion of the United States population. The 1995 study conducted by Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control surveyed 17,337 participants about experiences with childhood maltreatment, family dysfunction, and current health status and behaviors, and showcased that 69.9% reported at least one adverse childhood experience. If adverse childhood experiences are not addressed, what does this mean for the United States or the greater population? According to the American SPCC, Society for Positive Care of Children, 14% of men and 36% of women in prisons were abused as children. Children that go through abuse are 9 times more likely to commit criminal offenses. Between 6% and 14% of male offenders and between 23% and 37% of female offenders reported they had been physically or sexually abused before the age of 18. It is evident that many victims that end up going through one or more ACEs will have a higher probability of being incarcerated. On to my next point. Reporting child abuse and neglect often involves engaging with CPS, one of the most widespread and accepted avenues for addressing these concerns. While Child Protective Services is supposedly a preventive measure, unfortunately in some cases it has been ineffective and at times caused more harm. Here are two examples of this, and out of confidentiality there will be no names given. On to the first story. A young student decided to go to a counselor about an issue regarding to her family. As she was sharing some of her life experiences, she ended up saying a certain thing that raised the counselor's suspicion. Since the counselor was worried about the student's safety, they thought the best course of action was to report it. CPS decided to take the student through unnecessary testing and trials to see if she was safe enough to stay at home. She was not only questioned, but her family was questioned as well. Everyone said the same thing, that the student was not in any harm. After this lengthy process, CPS came to realize that the family was telling the truth. The interrogation this student faced ended up scaring and traumatizing her to this day. In the second case, someone unfortunately went through the hardships of abuse and neglect from their family. They were constantly neglected, denied food, and dealt with a barrage of verbal abuse. The correct measures were taken and CPS was contacted to open up an investigation. While everything was conducted properly, the person's family was informed of the visitation and what time said visitation would take place. As you can imagine, this gave the family time to clean up for CPS's arrival. Every wrongdoing magically disappeared, and as in many cases, the abuse continued after the investigation was closed. There is also an underlying problem of CPS getting flooded with cases. There is a mandated reporting law in the U.S. that states that all mandated reporters must call Child Protective Services on abuse or neglect if the evidence is presented. Mandated reporters can be civilians, teachers, law enforcement, social workers, or health care workers. Of course, like many laws, failing to report would resort to being charged with second-degree misdemeanor. Additionally, an issue not commonly talked about regarding Child Protective Services has to do with bias and discrimination. First, it is important to clarify that there is not only normal bias, but also unconscious bias, which is stereotypes or beliefs made about someone formed out of an individual's awareness. Statistically, children of color are more likely to be removed from their households by child welfare agencies due to bias and discrimination. According to the American Bar Association, a shocking 50% of Black children will experience one child welfare investigation before the age of 18. Many people of color unfortunately deal with the poverty around the United States. They often have to attend community programs just to support themselves and the families. While this is already a stressful situation for these families, they also have to deal with the fact that mandated reporters are working at these programs. If these reporters have some form of bias or prejudice against these people who are just trying to have basic needs met, they will call CPS and have these kids stripped away from their families. As these children are taken away from their families and placed in foster care, the feeling of unwantedness and uncertainty takes a toll on their psyche, yet again doing more harm than good. But bias does not stop at children of color. Another example of bias could be if a Christian social worker is investigating a case. He or she is more likely to have an unconscious bias made that all Christian families are good and therefore will not investigate any further. Bias has a way of swaying people's final judgment, and if bias or discrimination is present during an investigation, there is a chance evidence could be overlooked. The impact of adverse childhood experiences into adulthood and their prevalence within the population showcase that a solution is required. The first call to action has to be improving Child Protective Services. There is no debate that CPS has done a really good job reacting to and protecting the well-being of children around the U.S. But on the other side of things, Child Protective Services has done a very poor job in picking the more important cases and failing to react when needed. This is all due to Child Protective Services being very underfunded and undertrained. As recently as 2023, funding dedicated to child welfare was as low as $12 billion, which may seem like a lot of money, but this is far too little to support the future generation. More funding could improve CPS as a whole. In April of 2019, a new evaluation tool was released by the Allegheny County Office of Children, Youth, and Families. The data provided from this 100-factor evaluation showed that our current methods for evaluations were imperfect and left room for error. The AFST, also known as the Allegheny Family Screening Tool, eliminates any chance of bias being present during an investigation due to the screening tool being strictly based off of severity and not race. Although critics may dismiss childhood trauma as having an insignificant impact on the population, much evidence would show an adverse childhood experience are more common and require adequate prevention and solutions. Some critics may argue that trauma experienced in childhood could be too severe and irreversible, leading to psychological scars beyond belief. With the psychological scars, critics believe that abuse victims are not resilient and resources would just be wasted on them. First, it is important to state that abuse victims and now survivors are resilient. Their whole life, they not only had to deal with some sort of physical abuse, but also had to be put down and belittled. To say they are not resilient undermines those survivors that went through abuse, not only experiencing tremendous growth, but also emerged stronger. There is no such thing as getting fixed, because going through traumatic experiences like those of abuse will always leave some kind of remnants. As abuse survivors, they learn to cope through situations unlike any other, gaining greater self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and empathy. But instead of fixing what we think is broken, we should acknowledge how they need help from their traumatic experiences. If we can get them the help through trauma-informed therapy, education, and employment opportunities, we will not only see how resilient they are, but give them the self-worth they need. No help is wasted if done right. In conclusion, these are the 3 reasons why survivors of childhood abuse are not receiving adequate support: the long-term and short-term effects of abuse, ineffectiveness of current support, and the steps we need to take. You may ask, why does this matter? I have experienced 2 out of the 3 types of abuse: physical and cognitive. This means that I have experienced someone physically harming me and having someone intentionally cause emotional pain. The abuse started when I was 5. I was beaten and humiliated. From a very young age, I learned to watch out for what I did. I was told that if I stayed quiet and kept my head down, then I wouldn't get abused. So at times, when I was hit, I learned to tell myself that it was my fault. It was a very lonely experience for me because I felt like I needed to keep quiet and that no one would understand. So at times, I would go to school and smile and act like everything was fine. But when I went home, the feeling of emptiness overwhelmed me. No one knew what I was going through because I never told anyone. The pain was rooted so deep that at times I felt like I'm not human, like my existence was determined by other people. I learned to always think ahead in order to keep myself safe. I see now that I have experienced 4 ACEs, which would put me at risk for chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse. However, through the intervention of trauma-informed care, I have hope for a better future. As I matured in my faith, I was able to realize at a very young age that it wasn't God's fault. I now understand that what I went through shaped and molded me into the person you see today. And now I can use my story to be an advocate for other survivors. It says in Psalms 139, verse 16, that all the days ordained for me were written in his book before one of them came to be. I can confidently say that God not only knew what I would go through, but he knew who I would become. I'm still on my journey to wholeness, but as a survivor of abuse, I can acknowledge that we need help and support through trauma-informed care. The time has come to confront the reality of abuse and take meaningful action. By standing together, we can create a world where every child is valued and every survivor is supported. Let us be the voice for the voiceless and the champions of change. Thank you.
Pastor Donovan. Good job, Joseph.
Thank you.
You gave some really jarring statistics on child abuse, and then also biases in children of color. and proportionally being gotten CPS called on them. In some of your research, did you come along any biases that may have been uncovered in the CPS's training on the other end of it, or any type of training that they could continue to work on to help alleviate this on the other side of it? Because we know the societal portions of it a little bit, but on the other side of it, did you come across anything that would suggest that the trainings or things that the CPS workers go through that could help with this situation?
Well, for one, not regarding the bias, but I have seen a lot of research, or I've done my research on a lot of cases which have been taken by CPS when they know that they, CPS workers, when they know that they couldn't work on them. And just being overworked will make them tired, will make them lose their judgment, and have worse calls. So that's, yeah.
Joseph, thank you. You did a great job with your speech, very well researched, and I also just want to appreciate and call out the bravery and the vulnerability that you showed by sharing sort of your personal story. I know Mr. Grundon and I have talked before about how sometimes we try to dissuade kids from doing a personal topic because it's just so difficult, and you've handled it very well.
Thank you.
I also want to say that I'm really glad you're here at Logos, because I know you are well loved and cared for, even if you don't always feel it sometimes, right? But you are well loved and cared for, and I know that's part of the solution, part of the remedy. So I'm a little bit older than you, and I definitely grew up in a time period where maybe mental health and things weren't as talked about as much. And in being a guy, and both of us being men, I think there's definitely an understanding of a culture that says men should just fix themselves, like get over it themselves, those types of things. You referenced some things that need to happen for someone to recover from abuse. Do you think that someone can heal themselves?
Personally, on my journey through abuse, I have found it very hard to heal by myself. At times I want to admit that I can do everything myself, but I had to come to the reality that who I leaned the most on was my friends and not myself. So is it possible to work on yourself individually? Maybe, it just depends on who you are. But would I recommend it? No. Because it is a very lonely experience if you try to do it by yourself.
Well done, Joseph.
Thank you.
Through your research about CPS, did you find any information about CPS themselves providing our families with trauma-informed care or mental health support services or even education for our parents? And if they are providing those things that you've come across, how do you think those things could be beneficial to prevent traumatizing experiences through CPS?
Thank you. I really like your question. So I have not seen that CPS has taken the measures to do trauma-informed care. But first is good to explain what trauma-informed care is. Trauma-informed care is the safety, choice, collaboration, trustworthiness, and empowerment. And where I feel these are all branches of trauma-informed care. And in each of these branches, they have different definitions, obviously. And one of the definitions has to be giving power to the individual of abuse. And I feel like that's where CPS fails, is because, again, going through abuse your whole life, you don't have the power. And CPS kind of just does an investigation and then takes these kids out, which I'm not disagreeing and I'm not saying that it's bad, but working with the children the best way that they can will help with the trauma-informed care. Thank you.
So Joseph, mental health is extremely important in our society today. It's taking a lot more seriously now than it's ever has been. And then there's also conversations being had that a lot of people are taking advantage of mental health, of abuse and things that have happened, or even fabricating stories about this. So as we look to progress in society, in mental health, and caring for people that have gone through abuse, how do you speak to kind of a growing culture that desires attention and is misusing abuse and mental health for their own advantages?
I really like that question. Again, I can only say it to a personal experience. I have gone through depression and all this other stuff, and at times, knowing that people go out on the internet and try to gather the attention for themselves, at times I question if I do deal with depression, and it is such I just have to say, it is such an evil thing to go out and try to garner attention for something that you don't have, because we victims and now survivors are dealing with that, and it takes our, again, power away, takes our empowerment away.
So in my role in teachers, every teacher here, Mr. Hornbaker at CSY, schools across the county, we are all mandated reporters. And the way that works is if we hear anything, we're obligated by law to report it. Whether we think it's true or not, doesn't matter. We have to report it. In my experience too, I kind of get, as a principal, I kind of see what then happens after that. A lot of times teachers don't know, but I've seen the good and the bad, both of which you've mentioned today really well. What improvements would you recommend to this system? I agree with you that it's not perfect. I would prefer something other than nothing.
Yeah.
But I also see how it's very problematic. Would you recommend any improvements to the whole mandated reporter system to CPS?
Again, also in my research that I've come across, I've noticed that the mandated reporters falsely accuse child abuse because they don't want to fear getting charged with a second-degree misdemeanor and possibly fined. And so they, in trying to be safe, they become over-safe, and then they will accuse the wrong types of people. What I would recommend is just, again, listening, understanding, sitting down with the student, see if it is going on currently. Yeah, because I had a scare with CPS once, and it was because I was bottling in so much emotions that I needed to go out and just speak my mind. I just needed to speak how I felt. And in doing so, I not only almost had CPS called on me, but then I had the fear about getting taken away from my family. And then I was also told that what I said wasn't right and that I should just kept it to myself. So again, taking the power away.
For those that deal with abuse, any of the different types, or mental health issues, so very often you deal with the feeling of you're not worthy and you don't deserve love, happiness, or anything like that. And that very commonly leads to those individuals not seeking help because they don't feel that they're worthy of that help. What would you tell those people to convince them otherwise?
Again, a very good question. I had it in my speech, but I decided to take it out. Me personally, it's hard to speak about it because I haven't received help. In my speech, like I said, I unfortunately took it out and said that although I know I need the help, I feel like I don't deserve the help. And all I can say, as I said in my speech about being an advocate, you do deserve the help. And no matter, sometimes the voices in your head get so loud that it outweighs everyone else's opinions, and it feelings and everything, but listen to the people around you. The people around you know you better than yourself sometimes, and it is so important to get the help that you need.
Take your own advice, Joseph.
So I just wanted to move like more future-oriented. It's a huge problem, all sorts of complexities and things like that, right? And we're never going to stop all trauma that can possibly happen to somebody, even if we train all parents and they do respond well. Economic downturns happen, different things happen,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of times we have to decide what we're going to put our attention towards. So I'm just asking for you, if you decided to go into a field that you could help in these situations, I'm not saying you need to, I'm just saying if you did, would you focus more on prevention or rescue? I'm looking for a better word, but sort of to try to keep the trauma from happening, or do you think it's more beneficial to focus on what to do after the trauma happens?
Just based off my research, it's to get the help after. Because there's not I'm trying to find research on like people that come out and say therapy help. You can't find it, and there's a shocking number of people that hasn't got help and then ended their life afterwards. And so I definitely feel like there is, again, like you said, there is no way that we can stop it. So, but we can prevent the kids from going through dark places, and that's all that matters.
Great job.